solve equations with rational coefficients. A couple things about solving equations. This is a thing that you need to get in the habit of, and that is make sure one of the things that you're doing is do the math. Like literally do the math. So there's some calculation work that happens in these things. Do that math. It's important. The second thing is this. Everything will get easier when you start writing everything out. So leave no doubt. Write things out. Okay? I can't stress that enough. The paper's not going to die. You don't have to make it as tiny as possible. Use the paper. Use your writing. Do the math. All that stuff that gets onto your paper frees up your mind to be able to think about the math as opposed to thinking about holding everything in your brain rather than writing 4 numbers or less than a paragraph's worth of digits. So let's start doing this then. Solve equations with rational coefficients. Here's our first example. I've got 3/5 x equals 24. What we always want is we want that x to be by itself or x multiplied by 1. So we want this to say something like x equals, and don't forget that coefficient of x here is 1. So we want to turn this into 1, so we're going to multiply this by the reciprocal. That will turn 3/5 into 1. Remember, the reciprocal is any number that when multiplied by another would equal 1. So now I've got 5 times 3 is 15, 3 times 5 is 15, 15 divided by 15 is 1. If I'm doing it on this side, remember that's got to happen on this side as well, 5/3. And just for the sake of evening things up, let's put this 24 over 1. Now, I've got 5 divided by 5, 3 divided by 3, that gives me 1x. I'm good right here. Now I've got this. There's 2 ways I can do this. I can literally do the math, multiply it out, or I can do the math with division first. So let's just divide 8 and 24 first. So divide by 3, and I get 8. Now I have 8 over 1 times 5 over 1. Remember, multiplying fractions, we've got 8 times 5 is 40. 1 times 1 is 1, which means that x equals 40. I can't stress enough, like, this isn't a phony baloney time to say, it's 40, I'm done, I walk away. You can check your answer. So in everything that we do with equations, you can check to see if you're right. Let's do the check here. So we'll put 40 back in for x. So when we rewrite this over here, let me pick a different color. Let's go with red. Let's see how good this red is. So I've got 3/5 times 40 over 1. So I've taken the 40, because x is equal to 40, and I've put it in for x, and that's going to equal 24. So right off the bat, I want to do a little division before I multiply to keep my numbers sane. I've got a 5 and a 40. They have a common factor, 5 is a common factor of 40. So I'm going to divide this by 5 to get 1, divide this by 5 to get 8. Now I've got 3 times 8 and 1 times 1, giving me 24 equals 24. And that checks. That's right. That means my solution here, x equals 40, is correct. Let's take it up a notch. So we're still solving equations with rational coefficients, which is that comparison of 2 numbers. And what we have here is 2 mixed numbers. Now, mixed numbers are really unwieldy in equations like this. We're going to want to convert those to improper fractions. The other twist in this problem is that we have the variable on the right side. So that's not going to change anything for what we're doing. It doesn't matter which side the variable's on. At the end of the problem, we can get a value equals y, and that's perfectly fine. So let's shoot for that. I'm just going to write this down here now. Something is going to equal y. Now, let's convert these to improper fractions. So we take the denominator multiplied by the base. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7, so that becomes 7/2, equals 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9, 9/4 y. Same thing that we did previously. We're going to multiply by the reciprocal here so that we get 1 with y. Our reciprocal of 9/4 is 4/9. Remember, it's the y here we're trying to get by itself. So we would not do the reciprocal of 7/2 because that doesn't do anything for us. We want to do the reciprocal, that's the coefficient of y. So now I have 4 times 9 is 36. I'm just going to write it over here. 4 times 9 is 36, and we know that equals 1. That gets us to y equals 1. So I have 1y. Now, if I do it on this side, I've got to do it on this side, 4/9. And now I've got, let's do a little division beforehand. I've got a 2 and a 4 here. If I divide both those by 2, I get a 1 and a 2. Now I have 2 times 7 is 14. 9 times 1 is 9. 14/9. That's fine. We could leave it as 14/9, and what we know then is that y is 14/9, or 9 goes into 14 one time with 5 remaining, 1 5/9. Now I'm going to leave it as 14/9 for when I do my check. So let's step over here and do the check. Bloop. That is 3 and a half equals 2. I did it again. Let me rewrite the whole thing. My gosh. 3 1/2 equals 2 1/4 times 14/9. First thing, make them into impropers so they're easy to work with. So I've got 7/2 equals 9/4 times 14/9. Oh, I see something really sweet here, right? We've got our 9s. 9 divided by 9, these become 1s. And now I've got 7/2 equals 14/4. Are those equivalent? Absolutely, they're equivalent. This fraction is just this fraction scaled up by 2. So if I divide this by 2 and divide this by 2, I get 7/2 equals 7/2. And I think this marker's done. Don't forget, rational numbers can be decimals too, because we can write decimals as fractions. So in this we've got negative 1.4 is our coefficient of x here, and that's equal to 2.1. So first thing, let's just do the math. We want x to be by itself, so we want this to end up looking like x equals. So that means we need a coefficient of 1 for x. So let's divide by negative 1.4, because negative 1.4 divided by negative 1.4 is 1. And if we do that on one side, we do it on the other. Don't forget that sign. That sign is important because that sign needs to get to this side too. All right, so now I've got 1x equals, all right, we need to do a little side math here. So I've got negative 1.4, and that's going into 2.1. Remember our rules for division of decimals is that our divisor here, I've got to get rid of this red here. Goodbye, red! Our divisor here has to have no decimal places in it. So let's move it 1 to the right. We're in essence multiplying both numbers by 10. So now we have negative 1.4 and 21 is our dividend. So how many 14s are in 21? There's 1, so that's 14. 7 remaining. Our decimal place moved to here, so I'm just going to put that above that. Now, here's my 0, annex my 0, bring my 0 down. How many 14s in 70? We need something that could end in a 0. How about 5? Let's try 5. 5 times 4 is 20. Carry the 2. 5 times 1 plus 2. That worked. Is 0. So go back. Let's just look at this real quick just to double check for sign. We know this is going to be 1.5, but we have a positive divided by a negative. Integer operations tell us that a positive divided by a negative means our result or our quotient is a negative. So x equals negative 1.5. Perfect. Now let's check it. Like, do you believe that answer, right? Or do you just want to quit? So that's the difference between being great at this and potentially being terrible at this. Let's do the check here. Get some room. What I've got is negative 1.4 times negative 1.5 equals 2.1. Let's rewrite that as 1.5 times 1.4, and let's do some math. 4 times 5 is 20, carry the 2. 4 times 1 plus 2 is 6. Annex a 0 here, that 0 is not there. We're just multiplying by 10 here. 1 times 5, 1 times 1, 0, 1, carry the 1, 2. Count your spaces now, 1, 2. There are 2 spaces there, which means we go 1, 2 here, which means our answer is 2.1 equals 2.1. And it checks. That's great. Let's look at the vocab now. V-O-C-A-B. What we've got then is stuff from this lesson. Let's not forget what a reciprocal is. Write any number that when multiplied will be 1. Reciprocal is important. Let's not forget what a coefficient is, because that matters. Coefficient is the number that goes along with your variable. So if I had 6x, my coefficient is 6. Let's not forget what a variable is. So let me write variable here. And that is a value that we don't know, or it could be anything if it's an expression, or if it's an equation, it's one thing. And let's just not forget this one. Don't forget that you have the check. The power of the check gives you the ability to make sure that you're right. Okay, guys, good luck.